Hello, my name is Isha Sajad, and the agency that I work at is Interfaith Rise, a refugee resettlement agency. We work on helping clients resettle from all around the world. They come to us, and we help them with the core services like ELO, housing, um, in job search, and things of that nature to help them get situated when they first come to their country. The ethical dilemma I'll be talking about is related to housing crisis for a client that I recently worked with. The client is a family of 8. They do not speak English and they also do not have their green cards yet. So their legal permanent resident card, which limits the available resources that they have. The father has had multiple health problems, which excuse them from work in Syria, but those accommodations are not made in the work and medical field here in the U.S. So even though he was not required to work in Syria, he still has to work over here. He worked 40 hours and made rent payments, which in the beginning when they first came, which was great, but then he ended up having to have an eye surgery here in the States. And during the time when he had eye surgery and he was recovering, he was on disability. But now that he is mostly recovered, he no longer has disability, but also isn't working a full 40 hours. He's working on a part-time basis, which is not sustainable to support a family of 8, and he's also the only one working. The wife does not work. She also does not want her husband working because of his ongoing health concerns. Um, and then I coupled with all of this together, they haven't really made any rent payments in over 6 months. The wife is pregnant, is 8 months pregnant, and they're soon to be expected to have a baby, so that's really adding to the urgency of it. They received multiple eviction notices but don't seem to take them seriously, and to be quite honest, the agency has run dry with what they can afford to help them with. They've already capped out and are overspending on this client at this point. And I've tried connecting them to outside resources and low income housing, but that's a very, very slow process. I think the state rental system waitlist closed January 31st of this year, and they still haven't heard back anything from this. It's a very slow process, and that's because if they receive all the funding, with all the funding cuts that are happening now. Some of the ethical considerations that can be applied to this dilemma include social justice and integrity. So the first one is that the client has multiple barriers going against them and they lack social justice in terms of equity, because his family is a larger family, they're more in need, they need more resources, but unfortunately they're not getting those additional resources that they need just because there aren't enough resources for everyone. So it's kind of, there's that. They and some of these resources vary in for housing, employment opportunities, and healthcare. And then advocacy on this level is what's really important, especially in terms of community aid and policy exemptions. So maybe increasing his and disability benefits or providing additional support in some shape or form. And the other one is integrity. So even though the agency is helping as much as they can, it's important for the agency, the worker, as well as the client to maintain professional and ethical boundaries, because it's safer for all of us involved in that scenario. At this point, I think the agency is on an unsustainable route, because they're spending more than they can afford on this client, and because they're overspending it, there's only a finite amount of resources, specifically funding. So if more of it goes to one specific client, then it's taking away from other clients. So that also turns into an ethical issue where now they're putting other clients are at risk of the same financial struggle that this client is facing. Some of the legislatures that can be applied and have impacted this client is the state rental assistance program. So this is the January 31st deadline I was talking about. It's a program that provides housing to low-income residents based on a criteria. There's a wait list, and it's pretty much on a first-come, first-served basis for those that do apply and get it. The other one is Legal Services of New Jersey. So it offers civil legal assistance such as housing, crisis and eviction defense to low-income individuals. And I think though this isn't readily available, it's not talked about as much, but really increasing affordable housing, all these wait lists tend to fill up so fast. So it's not just this client that's struggling, but multiple clients if the wait lists are filling up so fast. So really increasing affordable housing, but also expanding language access barriers, because again, this client does not speak any English. It's a family of 8 and none of them really speak English. The kids are in school and they're like picking it up, but again, they're kids and mom doesn't want them like getting involved in like the family issues in that sense. The cultural consideration of this dilemma include that the family comes from a traumatic background. So prior to coming to the U.S., they lived in a Syrian refugee camp, and if anyone's aware, the people of Syria are all too familiar with war and poverty and like the aftermath of it and like the trauma it can create. So because they come from a completely different culture, completely different like way of life, it's unrealistic to expect them to like catch on or like understand things very quickly. Yes, they've been here for a year and a half, but then also they've lived their whole life in Syria. So I feel like expecting someone to like learn the ropes, quote unquote, it's going to take some while. It's going to take a while, and then this coupled with the fact that they don't speak English is just making it a slower process. Um, the wife is also 8 months pregnant, so that's another whole concern on the table, and that has to be also come into consideration, like what the agency will do. It's like because now you're putting an infant at risk of being homeless from day one, and that just doesn't feel ethically morally right in any shape or form. But all in all, the agency only has a finite amount of resources, and allocating more than what they can is going to be unsustainable in the long term. And also, like, some can argue, like, it may not teach the client self-sufficiency, or like it might create like over dependence. The the environmental context that I'll be talking about is on a micro level. So the family structure, the client is a pretty large family. They're a family of 8 with a pregnant wife expected to give birth very soon. They also have like very limited finite financial resources. There's obviously a language barrier that I talked about, which makes it difficult for them to like navigate resources and to self-advocate. So even if those resources are available, unless they know that they're there and like they know how to access them, it's pretty much the same as not having them. The father has a history of health problems, and he recently had an eye surgery, which luckily was covered by Medicaid for the most part. After his surgery, he reduced his hours and doesn't for qualify for disability, but it's also like he doesn't make nearly enough to support a family of 8. And then financial hardship, obviously this all leads to like the family's unable to make consistent rent payments, which has already warranted them 2 to 3 eviction notices. The client's perspective, their perception of the problem is that they don't have any money and they can't support themselves, so they need whatever help that they can achieve. They also believe that applying for TANF is the only solution for the housing crisis. So like the mom is like really adamant about just applying for TANF, and like we've done TANF as well. We've applied for them. They were rejected the first time because this is what I was saying, like equity versus equality. The way TANF works is as long as they show on paper, like have documentation that the person that is applying for has worked, it doesn't matter like how much they work in comparison to like their family size and like their needs, you'll get rejected. So like with TANF, like you almost need to make like very little to $0 to qualify for TANF. That's like full government assistance. It's a 5-year program on average. But because this family does work, even though it's like very little, still nowhere near enough and sustainable for a family of 8. TANF rejected them the first time. We applied again in December. Haven't heard back. So this is again super slow. And even if they do get applied for TANF, it's not a quick immediate solution, if you will, which the wife is having that like, so we're trying to explain that to the wife, but she's not really grasping that. And again, this comes with like the difference in like culture and understanding and like how things work here. The client's strength and limitations. So I would say like the client is very good at self-advocating for themselves. Yes, they don't speak English, but they are really good at making sure that their presence is known and that they're heard. So even despite the language barrier, like the client does go all the way to self-advocate, which I think is like really important. Like sometimes you don't see that as much. She also doesn't get intimidated by that stuff. So that's like really, it can be a good and bad thing, but for the most part, I think it's important that she is able to stand her ground. What theories I would use? So the first one is person environment. This theory basically discusses that a person's circumstances and behavior isn't just a result of their personal failures, but also like external factors, whether it be social, political, environmental. And in this case, the housing crisis of the family is definitely influenced and exacerbated by the immigration status, because they don't qualify for everything that's out there simply because they're not legal residents. And affordable housing policy also is another like external factor like that's contributing. And then there's always like the financial strain that the agency has, which is a broader social structure. So the question is like, if the agency had enough money, would they still be in that situation? The other one would be Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which pretty much discusses that people will prioritize their basic safety and physiological needs over like um needs like self-sufficiency. So because this families are having a hard time like paying month rent payment, they're not in that space to think of like long-term planning while they're struggling as it is. So lack of basic housing puts them at a financial instability as it is, well as like mental health risk. And this is like only exacerbated with the urgency of the infant's health and like how the infant's going to be born and like what that might look like and how that might change everything. So the ethical decision making model that I chose was the Reimers 20 model from 2013. It provides a step-by-step process to making a decision in this scenario. So there are 6 parts to it. The first is identifying the ethical issue, which I discussed, their housing crisis, lack of English, um, the wife's resistance to letting the husband work, and her pregnancy. Then like identifying like key ethical perspective is the second part. So their clients are faced with like many barriers, like again like language, immigration, lack of American culture awareness, and um a healthcare system that doesn't like advocate for their needs the way they would like to, as well as like understanding the dignity and worth of a person. So like that was the social justice aspect of it. So dignity and worth of a person is pretty much respecting the client's decision while also making sure that they understand the inherent risk involved in their inaction. So yes, it like compromises a little bit on like their autonomy, but I think it's important for them to realize that being in a different country means like different rules apply for different countries. So like if they're having a hard time understanding how rules work over here, making sure that they do fully understand, so any decision or no decision they make, they're making it with full awareness of like the repercussions that it will create. And then weighing the potential courses of action. So continuing the agency fund is one, but that's not possible because it's not sustainable. In the long term, we can always increase advocacy for external housing resources, which we're doing, but it's like slow. It's slow but necessary. And then obviously educating the client about the urgency of eviction notices there in America. Again, this is like, yes, is it overstepping their autonomy? Yes, but I think in this case it's ethically necessary. And then consulting with supervising colleagues and making sure that we run through like all emergency housing options if they're available, and then trying to like increase collaboration within like community organization on a local level, or like even like other faith groups like a mosque, because this and then like making decision and documenting the process. So like anytime like information is given to them, information is received, any correspondence, making sure all of that is being documented, as well as like any efforts to like, connect them to like housing resources. So like yeah, so inform the client about a realistic housing option while also like making sure that self-sufficiency is at the forefront, and then monitor and evaluate the outcome. So in the event that an eviction notice does go through and they're getting evicted, still advocating for the client until the very last minute for emergency housing. And if the father chooses to work again, or like not work again but work more, providing employment support. And then something that I learned in this whole process is, I think in the beginning when I like saw like how they weren't taking the eviction notice seriously, it was definitely like I felt a little apathetic, and I hate to say this, but I was definitely a little apathetic and frustrated until I realized that I don't know their whole story. Like they come from a completely different country, completely different culture. I don't know what wars like what that can do to someone, like because I've never experienced this. And understanding that my privilege of living here and like being so familiar with the customs, and disables me from truly understanding the lived experience of my clients, and like realizing that even if it's something I may never understand, it could be very justified in their eyes. And it's also realizing that eviction notices may not hold the same meaning for everyone and across social and cultural significance. Um, for hire, it's like a very important because housing is the number one priority because housing isn't guaranteed. It's not a guaranteed right here, but in other countries it is a guaranteed right. So like they've never really had to think about it in that sense. And then if they've been living in like in a war in a war-stricken country, who's to say that an eviction notice isn't nearly as bad as it can get for them? Like because they've gone through so much worse, they're not nearly as worried about an eviction notice. And then asking myself questions like, am I unconsciously placing judgment on their choices, like the wife's reluctance to let her husband work? Like, am I just judging them from like what I would have done, and it's like I don't see them doing that, so like it's making me mad. But yeah, and thank you.